It is the 1st of June, 1942. A scrap heap sits behind the development laboratory at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Broken test equipment, discarded pipe sections, bent sheet metal, and spent propellant casings lie rusting in the summer heat. Most men walk past it without a second glance. Lieutenant Edward Uhl does not. He stops. He stares at a length of steel tube roughly 60 centimeters long, open at both ends, corroded and worthless by any conventional measure. And in that moment, holding a piece of junk that nobody wanted, he understands exactly how to stop a German tank. What Uhl builds from that scrap heap in the space of a single afternoon will become one of the most consequential infantry weapons of the entire Second World War. A device so simple that a single soldier could carry it, so powerful it could punch through the armor of a Panzer IV, and so revolutionary that every man-portable anti-tank weapon developed in the 70 years since traces its direct lineage back to that rusting pipe on a Maryland scrap heap. This is the story of the bazooka. By the autumn of 1941, the United States Army faced a problem it had not adequately prepared for. Armored warfare, as demonstrated with devastating clarity across Poland, France, and the North African desert, had fundamentally altered the nature of infantry combat. A German Panzer column did not merely threaten infantry, it rendered conventional infantry essentially helpless. The standard American anti-tank rifle, the Boys, fired a round capable of penetrating roughly 20 millimeters of armor at 100 meters. The frontal armor of a Panzer III sat between 30 and 50 millimeters. The Boys round bounced off it like a pebble off a castle wall. Artillery could destroy tanks efficiently, but artillery required vehicles, crew, preparation time, and fixed positions. The moment a Blitzkrieg advance outpaced the supply lines, as it had done repeatedly across Western Europe, infantry units found themselves isolated, exposed, and entirely without the means to stop the armored vehicles closing on their positions. Reports from the British Expeditionary Force's retreat to Dunkirk described infantry units lying flat in ditches, watching panzer columns roll past them at walking pace, utterly unable to engage. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department recognized the problem clearly. What was needed was a weapon light enough for one man to carry, simple enough for a soldier to operate under fire, and powerful enough to defeat medium tank armor at combat ranges. Those three requirements, taken together, had never been simultaneously achieved by any weapon in any army's inventory. The engineering challenge was, in practical terms, considered nearly impossible. The solution arrived from two separate directions that collided, with remarkable fortune, at Aberdeen Proving Ground in the spring of 1942. The first thread belonged to Dr. Robert Goddard, the father of American rocketry, who had spent decades developing small propellant rockets for military application, and had, in 1918, demonstrated a tube-launched rocket to Army representatives, who promptly showed no interest whatsoever. His designs were shelved, forgotten, and eventually inherited by the Army's Experimental Ordnance Division. The second thread belonged to Leslie Skinner, a methodical and deeply tenacious ordnance officer, who had spent months attempting to solve the anti-tank problem through rocket propulsion. Skinner had a functional rocket warhead, a shaped charge capable of focusing an explosive jet through armor plating using what physicists call the Monroe effect. The charge concentrated its explosive force into a narrow, penetrating stream rather than dissipating it outward, allowing a relatively small warhead to defeat armor many times thicker than the charge itself. Skinner's warhead worked, his delivery system did not. Every launch mechanism he devised was either too heavy, too unreliable, or too dangerous to the operator. It was Lieutenant Edward Uhl, assigned to assist Skinner in June 1942, who provided the final piece. Spotting the discarded pipe section on the scrap heap, a steel tube approximately 60 millimeters internal diameter, open at both ends, weighing just under 2 kilograms, Uhl recognized that the tube itself was the launch mechanism. The rocket needed no chamber, no breech, no firing pin. It simply needed a tube to guide it and an electrical ignition to light the propellant. Uhl fitted Skinner's warhead to a test rocket, slid the assembly into the salvaged pipe, connected a rudimentary electrical trigger, braced the tube on his shoulder, and fired. The rocket flew, the warhead detonated. The concept was proven in a single afternoon, using components that collectively cost nothing. The production weapon, standardized as the rocket launcher M1, measured approximately 1.37 meters in length, weighed just over 5.5 kilograms unloaded, and fired a 60mm shaped charge rocket capable of penetrating up to 100 millimeters of homogeneous armor plate at combat ranges of roughly 137 meters. It required a crew of two, one to aim and fire, one to load, and could be manufactured using simple steel tube, basic electrical components, and standardized rocket propellant. The Army ordered 5,000 units within weeks of the first successful test. Within months, that number had risen to 89,000. The bazooka entered combat for the first time in November 1942 during Operation Torch, the Allied landings in North Africa. Early accounts from Tunisia describe American infantry using the weapon against Italian and German armored vehicles with a mixture of success and hard-learned caution. At close range, below 100 meters, the shaped charge performed reliably against the side and rear armor of medium tanks. Frontal engagement of heavier German armor proved more problematic, and soldiers quickly learned that patience and positioning mattered as much as the weapon itself. By the Italian campaign of 1943 and 1944, the bazooka had become standard infantry equipment across American units. Accounts from Monte Cassino describe small teams of two-man bazooka crews holding narrow mountain passes against armored German counterattacks, the rocket's distinctive backblast sending a cloud of white smoke billowing behind the firer, which created its own tactical problem, as it revealed the position immediately after each shot. Soldiers developed techniques of firing and immediately relocating, sometimes crawling 10 to 15 meters between shots to avoid return fire. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Germany's response to the bazooka is, in itself, one of the most telling endorsements any weapon has ever received. In late 1942, German forces in North Africa captured several intact M1 bazookas and shipped them directly to Berlin for analysis. Within months, German engineers had produced their own version, the Raketen Panzer, known to Allied soldiers as the Panzerschreck, or tank terror. The German weapon was larger, heavier, and fired a more powerful 88mm warhead. It was in many respects technically superior to the original M1, but it required a two-man crew and weighed nearly twice as much as the American version, reducing its tactical flexibility considerably. The British Army developed the PIAT, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, which used a powerful spring mechanism rather than rocket propulsion, avoiding the bazooka's telltale backblast entirely. The PIAT required significant physical strength to cock and was notoriously difficult to operate under stress, but it could be fired from enclosed spaces such as buildings and foxholes, where the bazooka's backblast made indoor use extremely hazardous. Both weapons solved the same problem through entirely different engineering philosophies, and both saw extensive combat use through 1944 and 1945. The bazooka's historical impact is simultaneously straightforward and genuinely difficult to quantify. In material terms, it did not single-handedly reverse the balance of armored warfare. The heavier German tanks of 1944 and 1945, particularly the Tiger I and Panther, were resistant to the original M1 warhead from the front, and the weapon required skilled, disciplined operators to use effectively. The Army's own post-war assessment noted that a significant proportion of claimed tank kills remained unverified. What the bazooka unquestionably achieved was psychological and tactical. For the first time in the war, a single American infantryman could look at an approaching armored vehicle and know that he was not helpless. That shift in confidence, measurable in how units held ground, how ambushes were organized, how infantry interacted with armor, reshaped American tactical doctrine across every theater of the war. The M9 variant, introduced in 1944 with improved penetration and a two-piece collapsible tube for easier transport, remained in active U.S. service through the Korean War. Its direct descendants, the RPG-7, the AT-4, the modern SMAW, remain in service in armies across the world today. Surviving examples of the original M1 are held at the U.S. Army Ordnance Museum at Fort Lee, Virginia, and at the Imperial War Museum in London. Return for a moment to that scrap heap in Maryland. A summer afternoon, a rusting pipe, a young lieutenant who stopped walking and started thinking. What Uhl and Skinner built that day cost the United States Army nothing in materials and everything in imagination. They took a discarded tube, a shelved idea, and a physics principle first observed in the 1880s, and they assembled them into a weapon that a 19-year-old infantryman could carry on his back, load in 4 seconds, and fire at a 30-ton armored vehicle with a realistic expectation of stopping it. 9,000 components, 2 kilograms of steel, 1 afternoon. The German army was so alarmed with what they captured in the Tunisian desert that they reverse-engineered it within months and issued it to their own infantry. That, more than any production statistic or battle report, is the measure of what Uhl saw in a pile of junk that everyone else had thrown away. The best weapons, it turns out, are not always built in the finest laboratories with the largest budgets. Sometimes they are built on a scrap heap, by a man who simply refused to walk past.